So,
I have no, if I have clients, if they want healings, I'm gonna refer them to you, okay?
well, that would help.
Yeah,
That's very kind.
I mean, I read people from all over the world. I'll tell them you're in Thailand, but yeah, I would give them your email address.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Oh,
Very kind of you.
absolutely. This was
Um,
wonderful.
well, it was. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, I'm so excited to meet you. I'd love to hear all your stories and
Oh,
everything. But
honey, they're crazy, crazy. That program was crazy. Those people were dysfunctional. They weren't even psychic or spiritual. It was military, military.
yeah, I mean, but how did you even get? Have you written a book? How did you even get involved?
I know, I know. No, I'm trying to write my own book. That's another thing I gotta do. I've written see, what happened was is I'm from Pennsylvania, and I graduated from college in political science. And I had a sister, my twin, and she graduated with criminology. And we always wanted to be policemen because this was back in the 70s. And we have Scorpio moon. So anything Scorpio loves investigation. They love to investigate.
Right,
If you ever meet a cop, if you ever meet private investigator, there's a Scorpio somewhere. So we came down to Washington, D.C. to work for the FBI. And we really wanted to be agents, but we didn't have the eyesight. I don't have I have an in-depth problem in one of my eyes, and the FBI has one of the lowest eye requirements ever because they if they make an arrest, they mostly deal with white collar crime. So if they make an arrest, they know what they're walking into. It's not like a cop with the so I figured
right.
at that point, forget it. If I can't get in with the FBI, I'm not going anywhere. So I didn't know what to do, but I worked with a woman who left the FBI because the pay was awful. And it was a hard organization. I mean, it was hard.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
she called me and she went over to Army Intelligence. Her husband was in the Army and they just came and so she said, my husband got me a job over with him. She was working as a secretary and because she was making more money than what the FBI was paying her. So she said, well, come on over. They're having these intern programs for Army Intelligence. They're looking for people with political science degrees. So I applied and I got one. Now, what it was an intern. So for 2 or 3 years, I didn't have a job. I floated, and they sent me throughout the whole intelligence agency, like NSA, CIA, Army intelligence, and I had to learn how intelligence is collected, how it goes to the analysts, how it's disseminated, how it gets to the
Wow.
paw. Yeah, I mean, it was you learned all of this. Now, the first thing they did with me is they put me with signals intelligence, which is NSA, and they put me with telemetry. Now, I have a political science background. I have no science, and all I know is I'm looking at telemetry machines. That did nothing for me. I was bored, I was miserable, I was with these people that didn't like me. And I was a civilian female military, and I mean, the first 9 months, it was awful. But then eventually I got moved over to it was called a threat assessment office, and I started working on Latin American affairs, like Central America, whenever you had all the Sandinista communism and Puerto Rico or Panama. So I that was me, it was it was for okay, so that felt good. Then they sent me up to Congress for a while, and that was wonderful. And
Mm.
then so then they gave me a job. So then they had to look after 2 or 3 years, they gave me this job. And it was Central American Affairs. And during that time, the it the military got involved in interdiction. They needed more help. So it wasn't only DEA or the cops. The military got involved, and that was in my area of the woods. So I got involved. And that was fascinating. That was just the cart
Wow.
that was but it's so I did not realize it at the time, but apparently back in the 1970s, there was a man by the there okay, and I'm in the army working. So I hear there's this psychic program and I'm like, "Holy cow, how did this come about?" So I went now, and I was 29 years old. I was 30, and I was always psychic. I always had the interest. And my FBI year, it was very I started to go out of body more, and I started to channel, and I started to have more abilities. And I think it was because the work wasn't hard. I just had more time. I just remembered being very psychic at that time. So I went to meet with this general to get into this psychic program. Well, my bosses got mad at me because I went over their heads, so they kind of punished me. Um, but I did hear, so what happened was is when I went to the general, he met with me. He was really nice, but this was in 1984. But he said he was retiring. Now, the reason he was retiring was he was losing support at the joint, there's a joint chief of staff over at the Pentagon, the very high officials. And
Yeah.
one of those high officials in intelligence was the boss of the general. And that guy supported the general. He supported the army unit. He supported the army unit doing remote viewing. So this general had his support. He had backup. Well, the army guy left. He had to go somewhere. So they put another guy in his place at the Pentagon. And the general wasn't receiving the support that he needed. And I think this guy said stop and decease. He didn't want the general to do any more in remote viewing. So that meant, so he said, well, the heck, he would just retire. And whenever he left, he started his own, his own psychic company. Well, in the meantime, the Army remote viewers they belong to the Army intelligence. They belong to them. So when this guy retired in 1984, I guess from what I understand, that people that belonged to this psychic group, they were sitting around waiting to get new orders to go to their new jobs because they ordered, and I think they were going to help the civilian force. They were going to put them back into the system. Well, there was a guy by the name of Dr. Verona who worked at the national level. He worked for the Defense Intelligence Agency, and he also used to work for the CIA. And Dr. Verona went to school to Duke University to get his physics doctorate degree. When he was
Right.
there, he met his future wife, and his mother-in-law, future mother-in-law, worked for a psychic team, a psychic researchers named Ryan and Ryan. It was a husband and wife team, and they
Yeah.
were doing psychic research, and his future mother-in-law worked for that. So his mind got open to this ESP stuff. So
Right.
whenever he left, whenever he first got hired by the CIA, and he started to find out that there were certain institutions in the United States. There was Ryan and Ryan, Stanford Research Institute, Princeton. There were certain places that was doing ESP research, and he was curious about it and how he could apply it to applications in the intelligence community. So he gave
Yes.
Stanford a small contract. He sent them like $1 million or something and said, okay, what are you doing? Well, Stanford at the time was being run by Puthoff and Targ, and they did everything. They termed the word remote viewing and everything. So you had Dr. Verona, and he was looking at the scientific. You may have had the remote viewers doing the operations, like like finding a downed airplane or finding a hostage, but you had Dr. Verona looking at the science of it. Then you
Right.
had this little guy, Dale Graff. He was working down in Ohio for foreign technology, and he was a scientist, and he would get reports on what the Soviets were doing in parapsychology research. And Dale started to figure out what other countries were doing. So they called that the foreign assessment. Well, Dale got an award. He got an award in Ohio. It was a big award, and they were going to let him go on sabbatical for a year so he could go do a research project. Well, what he wanted to do is he wanted to do research on parapsychology. So he thought for this year he would go to Stanford and he would visit Princeton. Well, whenever the commander of the unit found out that he wanted to work in parapsychology, he took the award away from Dale. And he said, no, you're not going to do that. Yeah, so Dr. Verona called Dale because when Dale would write he would write the intel reports as to what the Soviets were doing, and Dr. Verona would read them. So when Dr. Verona found out what happened to Dale, he said, well, come on up to Washington, D.C. You can come work for me. So now you had Dr. Verona and Dale. They were looking at the foreign assessment. They were looking at the research. So all
Yeah.
of a sudden, you got this Army intelligence doing the remote viewing, and then in the intelligence community share information anyway. So if you had if you had the remote viewers doing an operation, it would be reported throughout the intelligence community. So so I think Dr. Verona went to Congress and told Congress, General Stubblebine is retiring. Don't lose the remote viewers. Don't use the unit. Just give them to me. Take them out of Army intelligence and put them under the Defense Intelligence Agency. So it took 1 year to do that, to 1985, and then in 1986, I got put into the program. Now, I got into the program because of the general. Now, because it was a special access program, you just couldn't advertise for people to be into, you couldn't advertise this.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
clearances. So everybody started bringing in friends. They, like this one guy had a friend and said, hey, I think you'll be a good remote viewer. So they were bringing in friends, and they had a list of people if they needed they had their own list. Well, here I was brought in by the general, so I'm sure if a general told them to hire me, they were going to do it because he was the general. So I went in, and they didn't like it that much. And I was a female, I was civilian. They knew I was doing the channeling. They said it was a bad habit, so they had to teach me. So they didn't really like me, but I was used to the military environment. And if anything, I worked at higher echelons than I did there. So I mean, they thought they were giving me a hard time and they didn't like me, but they didn't realize I took more abuse at a higher level than what they could. So I could persevere it. I could persevere it.
Wow.
And I had good results. And once I had good results, management wouldn't let those military near me. They were like, forget it. I mean, and then I think it took about a year. We had a change in management, and people that did not want me to do my channeling, a new management came in and they let me do what came natural to me, and we started to have good results. But the military went by a manual. Dr. Verona told SRI, Stanford Research, write me a manual. They were getting, every time Dr. Verona and his people went to Congress to ask for money, they would be laughed at, the psychics. So let's call them remote viewers. And so Dr. Verona hired Stanford. He said, write me up something technical, so when I try to get the money from Congress, they won't laugh at me. So they wrote something up called Coordinate Remote Viewing by Ingo Swann. Well, now everybody thinks that the coordinate remote viewing was Ingo's method. It wasn't Ingo's method. The government paid SRI to do it. SRI told Ingo to do it. The coordinate remote viewing, CRV, is owned by the US government. And I think now they're calling it controlled remote viewing. So there had to have been something legal. But
Mm.
they always say this is Ingo's method, and it wasn't Ingo's method. He got paid to do it. He was asked to do it, and I think the military came out, and the military loves to train, and so now they had a manual that they could train from, and all it was something to give to Congress so we could get money. So it just was just dysfunctional, and people you would think that if that these people would have read like psychic books, Edgar Casey, the Seth, they did nothing. To them, it was technical. It wasn't spirituality. It was just a technique to
Mm.
access and gain information.
Where do you feel like, because you're more spiritual as well. So where do you feel like the crossover is? I mean, or how does the spirituality part, how did it help you?
I had, oh my God, I had a much broader, I mean, I had a much broader range. You know, like, um, the technical thing with remote viewing is you put a picture in an envelope and you teach somebody to access, and you have to access and describe the picture.
Mm.
Now, there's nothing spiritual about that. And they taught this technique where you go in stages to say it's a mountain or whatever. But have you ever heard of the Silva mind control? I read the book. You go,
Yeah, yeah.
okay, you go down and meditate, and then you see a picture, and then you come back and say, I saw mountains and water, and there's a house to the side. That's that's technique. That's technique.
Mm.
By and you can teach somebody technique. You can teach them up to a certain point. However, you could take somebody and you can teach them remote viewing, but it took the person. I could find hostages. I could tell you the health statuses of the hostages. I could tell you how leaders of the world were thinking, what they were thinking. I could find, I could locate. I mean, locate. I could name like where somebody was. I could locate things. The people that were not psych could not do that. So there was something in my mind that was different. I think,
Right,
but I also had a deeper spiritual connection. I knew, like I would do automatic writing through my spirit guides. I mean, I would say, hey, I would talk to my spirit guides and I'd say, hey, they're looking for, this Thomas Miller. Where's Thomas? They tell me.
right.
I
That's obviously totally different to,
put in the
um,
picture in an envelope.
yeah. And
Yeah.
did you have any, I'm curious about like any particular experience you had where it kind of surprised you? Like there's the limits that you thought you had about your psychic ability or spirit was kind of like, opened a bit more, like
I was
your,
wide open. I was wide open. I levitated twice. I didn't even know I was levitating.
what you,
I
so
levitate. I was coming off the couch. I didn't even know I was levitating. I could levitate. I didn't
you were levitate. So, okay, tell me the story.
I was
You're sitting at home or you're,
I'm at home and I'm levitating. And I was laying on my sofa and I was levitating and I went, oh, damn, or something. And as soon as I said that, I came flat down. And then it happened another time and it kept happening. But the problem was is I would be so surprised that I would just go, oops, and then I would come down. But I think there was something in my mind. It was just something in my mind was working at that time that allowed me to levitate. And then it kind of closed off and never came back.
what was the difference? I'm curious. So, what was the difference between a levitation and an out of body where you float out of the body?
When you float out of the body, my regular body's there. My physical body was with me when I was levitating. When you
Okay,
leave
so it's
the
like
body,
out
you
of
leave,
body in the body.
yeah, you leave the body, and you kind of look down and there's your body, but you're flying. No, my physical body came with me. It was coming with me.
Wow.
Oh, wow. Yeah, yeah. But I don't know. I mean, but I had confidence. No, I had confidence in what I was doing, but the problem was you never knew if you were right or not. I mean, they'd say, where's Joe Smith? And I'd say, well, I think, Joe's here and we're getting this and he's feeling like this. And then they would take it to an analyst and then the analyst would have to act on it. Now, not all psychic information is 100%, and not
Right.
all information is, and it's a lot of psychic information is very conceptual. You have to like read between the lines. So, you know, so it was scary. I mean, whenever, they'd say, where's so and so? And I go, "Well, it's right here." And then they would go look. It was scary. I mean, you'd pray and think, oh my God, I hope it's there. And sometimes we were right and sometimes we were wrong.
Mm.
But it
Was there any moments where you were like, I mean, scared? Like this is just really freaky. I don't like this. I don't want to be here. No.
no. The hostages were that was difficult. I mean,
Iran, the
yeah,
Iran
yeah,
hostages.
that was difficult.
Carter time. That was Carter? No, after Carter.
After Carter. Terry Anderson, Terry Waite.
Um,
Those were hard because you could feel I mean, one time I think I did Gaddafi's chemicals, following the chemicals, how were they getting in? Did he have them? You don't get turned you don't get emotional over chemicals. I
mm,
did a lot on Gorbachev. They didn't know if they could trust Gorbachev or not, because remember he came in and wanted to he
yeah.
needed, can we trust this guy? Things like that. But the hostages, you could feel like their pain. I mean, that was, yeah.
And did you? So I'm curious about Gorbachev because I mean, I always had this feeling that he was kind of a nice guy.
Well,
Yeah.
I did not know I was doing him. I did not, they'd come in and they'd say, okay, and they would tell you if it was a personality, it'd say, okay, this is someone. Tell us anything you can about the person in the envelope. And the first thing I got is I said, it's a man and he reads the Bible. Well, so that right there would have told you I said it's a man and he reads the Bible. And I said that he's in a very high political position and it's a surprise that he got there. He should not have, that it was a surprise that he's there because someone else was supposed to be there. Well, the information came back to me a couple of months later, and they said it was Gorbachev, and the United States did not know if they could trust him because remember, the Eastern Bloc countries were in bad shape economically. He needed our friendship because they needed to trade and get stuff on the Western market because they were starving. So he did it, I think, out of economics more than anything. But they said he read the Bible. That right there would have said he's a nice guy.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
You'd think. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You'd think.
So I think
Definitely.
they were kind of shocked, and then they came back and they said that apparently somebody else was supposed to be the president of the Soviet Union. It wasn't supposed to be him, but at the last minute, the Politburo
Politburo. Mm.
changed their mind and they put him in place. So when I said he wasn't supposed to be there, they said I was right.
Wow.
But those
Yeah.
people that didn't have they didn't have the psychic gene. They can't do that.
Right. Right. So I'm curious because I mean, number one, you're teaching your own method, are you? This um, writing, remote
Channeling,
viewing, cha-
automatic, right? Yeah.
automatic writing. So, how would I mean? What do you think is the fundamental difference? You've obviously learned the other method, the controlled remote viewing or coordinate
I
remote
no,
viewing.
no, I learned extended remote viewing, which was more like did you ever meditate and get a picture?
Yeah.
Yeah, silver mind control. Like you kind of they wouldn't let me in CRB because I was female civilian and I didn't want it anyway. I just
Okay. So you never studied it. I got the impression. So you'd never studied that. So can you tell me about the channeling part? Like, do you feel anybody can do it?
Oh yeah, I tell people to put the pen on the paper and that you're gonna get, and ask, do I is my spiritual guide here? Or, you just and you make a connection. It's like you open up a channel so that you can talk to your spirit guides that will help you. See, I remember the very first, and I told them you have to have I can remember the very first sentence I got when I channeled.
I was going to ask you, yeah, how did this start? Yeah.
Okay, what happened is that I was always interested in the subject because I had out of body when I was young. Now, my mother was very psychic, but we didn't know it. But she always had paraphernalia sitting around the house, and she was interested in the stuff. Before I came down to the FBI, I took an ESP class at the college, one of those night classes where you pay $30 and go for 6 weeks. But I had to quit because I got a job at a factory and I had to make money because I was coming down to work for the FBI. So I quit the class, but I liked
Right.
the class. Now, I was working for military intelligence in Washington, and my mother called me from Pennsylvania and she said, um, her and her friends wanted to do something. My mother always took classes, and she said, I don't know what to do. We want to do something. What should we do? And I said, take that ESP class from Dr. Bordas. So she did. Now, what they found out was my mother was very psychic. She could hold, she was good at psychometry where she could hold objects. And so my mother, she was very proud of herself. So, so they thought, so my mother was real happy. And then she got involved with within another psychic group with this older lady named Alice. And here, some people that we knew worked. So anyway, my father had died. This was, and I was working for military intelligence, and I was having a hard time with my father's death. And my mother sent me the book. She said, read this book. It'll make you, she said, you'll understand your father's death. And it was by Ruth Montgomery, and she channeled through Fletcher, her guide. I
Okay.
resonated with that book. I just resonated with it. When I
Mm.
put down the book, I started channeling. I started my own channeling. And and I kept getting the message was is I respect your mother, I respect your mother. So finally, after a while, after I finally thought I got the I said, why do you respect my mother? And then they wrote, because she loves you very much. So I started talking. It's like you start talking. So people think that they just sit there. If they don't have anything in their head, nothing's going to happen. So you have
Right.
to have a dialogue. Is there someone here? Is there somebody here that wants to help me? Or, or do I have a guide? Who are you? I mean, you have to start a dialogue. And when you write, you will get full sentences.
Right. Right. And so I'm curious because I've been looking at I don't know if you've heard of IFS, so this internal family system, which talks about the multiplicity of self. That we tend to think the self is this one thing,
And it's not.
whereas maybe consciousness is the one thing, and then there's lots of different, you know, tunes in that piano. Yeah, um, and that. So, do you feel like you're connecting to another part of yourself, or
Well, they could, they don't, now they say higher self. Like, I think when my sister went to Mansbridge, he said, you're connecting to your higher self. But I feel I'm talking to entities. I mean, they tell, I mean, I feel that, I mean, I've had UFO experiences. I've seen little,
oh, do tell.
oh, I was in eighth grade and, there was a bunch of us kids, it was at that dusk between night and it was spring. And we
Yeah.
had to quit playing baseball because it was getting dark. And we heard this whoosh, 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 and we saw a UFO just go right over us. And we screamed and yelled, and the grown-ups saw it. So I think it went down as cited. But when I retired in 2010, I had a UFO experience. And it was no big deal. I just had a but then I feel like one night I felt like there was a gray, like, the white head with and
Yeah.
I felt like this gray, but I felt like I knew that gray. I was with him before. And when I saw him, I kind of got happy and I said, hey, how you doing? Long time no see. And but it was a mental, and I think he probed me, which was okay. I wasn't scared. And then I probed him back. And then there was one time I felt like I saw the,
When you say probe, you mean like with the mind?
no, they get a little instrument and they probe you. He had an instrument.
So how did you get to this place that he probed you?
Oh no, he was just, it's like a portal. You just get into a portal.
So where were you? Where were you? Where did the portal
Oh, I
appear? What
was
did the
at my
portal look like?
oh, I was at my house. I was down in my basement by myself, out on my deck. You can go, and I just felt the portal, and then you're there, and I'm talking. You're just there.
Yes, I've now talked to other people that have had similar experiences. So it's you're like in another dimension.
Yeah, yeah. And then he used to and then he probed me, and then I took his instrument and I probed him back.
And he was okay with that. What did
Oh
you
yeah,
find out about him?
I don't know, nothing like I would,
He's
you know,
kind of nice though.
and then after that, I saw the mothership, and I could see all these little Martians, and they were walking with like little suitcase. They were walking with like backpacks around the mothership with little backpacks on them. They were cute.
Right.
And
Wow.
my mother was very psychic. She used to go down, listen, she'd call me up at work and she'd say, "Hey, I went grocery shopping yesterday and I decided to drive home." So she said, so I drove home and she said, and I turned at this road. And she said, and then I went and I got in, and then I drove to the end of the road and I just kind of sat there and it was beautiful. There were stars and it was really beautiful. And then she thought, well, I better go home. So she said she came home and then the next day she realized there was no road where she turned. There was no road. She went on a
Right.
road. So she said, and then she told me where she turned, and it was not, I said, that's a cornfield. She said, I know, but so, and she had several of those experiences where she would, take a turn on a road, but the road never existed. So she going into another dimension.
Right.
Oh, my
It's
mother,
it does sound like you come from like a very psychic history, like
well,
family.
the guy, now, when I worked for the psychic program, there was a general. He was the head of the Medical Intelligence Air Force Command, and he would get his money from Congress, appropriate money, and he put in money into psychic research. He was a doctor, but he was a genetic doctor. So he would take his money, and for research, he was looking at genetics. So when I
Hmm.
met him, I said my mother was psychic, my sister was psychic, my two cousins. I had one aunt, and then I said he said it's in your gene, and he said that whenever at his command up at the medical command, he had a little I guess somebody working for him, a young lieutenant, I guess, in the military, a young guy. And he said this kid could fix anything. If an airplane, he knew how to fix airplanes. He said one time the air conditioner was broken in my office, he fixed the air conditioning. He said one time the secretary's car was broke, couldn't get home. He fixed the car. And he said, I'm watching this guy. And he said he had a talent for fixing things. And he
Yeah.
was very, very helpful to me. So he asked the guy, he said, "Do you have any brothers or sisters?" And the guy goes, "Oh, yeah." He came from a farm in Iowa, and it's a farmland, and they have big families. He goes, "Oh, yeah, I
Yeah.
got 12 brothers. I got 12 brothers, two sisters. I come from a big family." And the general was thinking to himself, how could I get his brothers, how could I get his siblings to come work for me? Because he knew they had that in them on how to fix stuff. And he was
Right.
thinking, wow, what I could do with them. But he said it's illegal. You can't hire you can't hire people. But he said, I was just this little guy, and I'm thinking, how can I get these his siblings here to come work for me? He said that guy was amazing. He just could fix things. But oh
So
yeah,
did you? Yeah.
it was oh yeah, it was very yeah, it's in my family. It's a gene.
Well, I mean, I want you to be part of a like a psychic research program. I mean, did you get involved in, did people say, "Come on, Angela, we want you to,"
Well, that was part of when I belonged to the program, that was part of Stanford Research Institute because they were given contracts to work with us. Now, at that time, I started to work with Dr. Ed May. And Ed May, he he does a lot of research in, now he's an atheist and he doesn't believe in, he's a
Yeah.
hardcore scientist, he's an
Yeah.
atheist, he doesn't believe in spirit or anything.
Right.
But I have worked for Ed. I'm working for him now. I'm still working for him because he has the best protocols and he has the best understanding of how remote viewing works. Now, and we got invited to Russia in 2015. And we went because when the Soviet Union fell, when there was no more Cold War, Ed May was working for Stanford Research Institute, and he came to Washington and he said, "You're going to give me money, and I'm going to Russia." And he said, "This is the most open the country's going to be." And he says, "I want to find out who's doing what,
Yeah.
and so and Ed ended up making about 20, he went many times. One time he took Joe McMoneagle and they met the Russian psychics. And so then there became this book. It was called ESP Wars, East versus West. And it
Mm.
was written in Russian and it was written in English. And in it, it talks about how the Soviets used their psychics, how we used our psychics. Now, the Soviets, they did healing. They put their psychics right next to the president where they were supposed to ward stuff off. And we were strictly just remote viewing. Now, the reason being is didn't get into a lot of, or we weren't allowed to do the move, like they did, the Soviets did psychic, the movement of objects. But what happened with us was back in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, the CIA was interested in psychic stuff, but they were giving people they were giving them LSD. And the CIA was manipulating people's brains.
Yeah.
So they had to stop. After so many people committed suicide or they had to stop. So Congress
Right.
said stop and decease. So when our people when DIA went to, and Army Intelligence went to Congress, they wanted a program, and Congress said you will do nothing but remote view. They did not want us to do PK. Um,
Yeah.
and they said no manipulation. The Department of Defense had to put up human use. We signed they had to sign human use that they could not mess with us, and that there was a board that they not only reviewed they needed, the sessions had to be above board, there could be no cheating. So they had to review that, but they also had to ensure, like if Ed May wanted to do testing on our brain, like he took us out to New Mexico where they made the atomic bomb, and he wanted to probe like the back right part of the brain. I mean, Ed
Yeah.
had to go to them and explain what he wanted to do and how it wasn't manipulation. So we were very, I mean, there was
Protected.
no messing around. In fact, one of the remote viewers brought in a deprivation tank and put it in the remote viewing building for people to get in, and and he was told to get it out of there because it could mess with the mind. And that when we would do meditation or when we would try to go down to visualize the report, we would say that we put ourselves in a self-hypnotic state. You couldn't say that somebody was in the room and hypnotized you.
Okay.
So we were,
That's
yeah.
interesting.
And if I went to work and they wanted me to work and I said, no, I don't feel like working today, they couldn't do anything about it. I mean, they were very, very careful with us. That's
Mm.
why I don't think that we explored as much as we could, because like Ed may say, we were happy we got what we wanted after the CIA fiasco.
Right. And what did you discover about the Soviets? Was there something that like totally
Well,
amazed you?
well, what happened was is Ed started, well, yes, because we got invited to meet with them and that we met their psychics, and their psychics were channeling. We said, how do you get your information? They were channeling. They were channeling, and they were very spiritual people. Shamanism started there.
Right. Right.
Stalin went to church every day. There's more churches on Red Square than you can even imagine. Um, they brought me back into the now the one there was we met one guy, he was second in charge of the KGB, and this guy was just nuts, but I think he was trying to make psychotronic weaponry, which I don't think he succeeded. Then there was one man, he invited us, he was a doctor, a medical doctor, but he was also a psychiatrist. And he was teaching psychology at the University of Moscow. And we went, he invited us to his classroom, and he brought us back into the labs where they taught the movement of objects. There were rooms where they would teach people how to move objects,
Okay.
and we went to the.
Psychokinesis, yeah. Did you have any experiences with psychokinesis
No,
yourself?
they
Never.
tested me on it. They've asked me to do psychokinesis. I've been tested on it. It takes so much energy. My hookup is channeling.
Right,
That's my
right.
hookup. I
Did you get like a feeling that they were doing channeling in a different way to the way you do it, for example,
no,
like you
they were doing exactly what I was doing.
exactly what you were doing? Do you now I guess a lot of people, and I'm thinking, don't know if you realize because we didn't start thinking this could be a podcast, but I mean it could be.
Mhm.
But I'm thinking people worry about channeling that some bad force is going to come through them. What do you say to that, or how do you even protect against that? Because I guess, like, in the realm of possibilities, it's a possibility.
Okay. Um, I just say there's negative. You don't say bad, you say negative. There's negativity and there's positive, and that we live on Earth, so we have a dual society, but it's not bad, it's negative. Now, listen, when I started to channel through my little entity, he identified himself as George. So I'm writing through George, and my sister came home from work and she says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm channeling." She says, "Well, I want to channel." So I said, so she started channel. So she said, "Hey, I got a guy, I got a channel." She says, "I got a person here named Maury." She kept calling him Maury. And I said, "Well, what does Maury have to say?" Well, we were getting some pretty good information. We were like, my one cousin was trying to adopt a baby, and we said she's going to get a baby girl on March 18th, and she did. They were talking about
Right.
my mother. My mother had a miscarriage, and that it was a boy, and that my dad was with the boy. So, in other words, I had a brother that
Right.
and learning a lot, like, oh, well, you know what? So, and then they would talk about my sister started to see my mother's dead relatives who she so my sister would call my mother and say, "Well, I see this," and my mother goes, "Oh, yeah, she knew who these." But anyway, we were channeling and we were getting some pretty good information. Well, every once in a while, little Maury would say, "Oh, and I am a negative spirit." Maury would say, "I am a negative spirit." So I said, "Louise," I said, I heard that sometimes I heard that, there can be really bad spirits." I said, so stop writing through them." She goes, "Yeah, I know." So then after a while she would write, and then little Maury would say, "Oh, by the way, I'm a negative spirit." So, and then we kind of got used to him, and he would never leave, but he was a negative spirit. Well, my sister was taking an astrology class at the time, and the astrology teacher told her, she said, "Louise, I want you to go to the Fred Mansbridge Institute, make an appointment, because what you and your sister are doing, you need to be educated in what you're doing." And we must have been channeling for about a month or 6 weeks. And hold on, I got to plug in my computer. I just realized it's not plugged in and I don't want it to go off. Okay.
Yeah.
So I went to see Fred Mansbridge, and I said, "I'm working through this guy named George or whatever." So everything was fine. Oh, and then my sister, her handwriting was different. And so I went at that time, I was meeting with the general and his people because they were trying to get me up to the psychic program. So I showed some people my sister's handwriting, her channeling, and they said she needs psychiatric help. So I went home and I told my sister, I said, "You think you need to see a psychologist?" And she said, "Probably." So, so anyway, so my sister, the night before she was to see Fred Mansbridge, little Maury comes up and he says, I, "This is the last night. I am leaving you forever." He said, "I'm leaving you forever. Um, I'll never be back." Well, by that time we kind of liked him and we said, "Well, you don't have to go. It's okay." Um, So the next day, my sister goes to see Mansbridge and she says, I'm writing through a guy named Maury. And Fred Mansbridge goes, no, you're writing through a guy named Maurice. Address him as Maurice. Maurice is the positive and Maury is the negative. So then we started to address Maury as Maurice. And he said, now you know. So I think what I learned from that was don't be afraid of we loved the guy when he'd say, hey, I'm negative, I'm a negative spirit.
Right.
We would, we'd
Right.
go, oh,
But there seems to be like this positivity that you have even towards, like, we'll say somebody, if somebody said like negative spirit, uh, there's a guy called Robert Faulkner who wrote this book called The Others Within, and he said like, if you feed the negative with fear, yeah, but if you're like, oh hi, you're negative, oh okay, yeah, you know, you're not quite so
no,
scared,
he
and so
was
you don't.
adorable. I mean, he had a wonderful sense of humor. And really when you write, I mean, it's the thing is there's a lot of humor in when you make contact, even with the ETs or with there's a lot of joy. There's a lot of there's there's learning and that they can teach you a lot. And but there's humor, and I think people miss they just miss the whole point on the humor. I mean, we knew Maurice was negative and we liked him and maybe we shouldn't have been, but we kept going, he kept popping up and
Yeah, I mean, kind of Jerry Seinfeld's kind of negative, isn't he? You know,
we got Maurice
and it
back.
makes him so adorable, you know.
And Maury did leave us forever. Whenever he said, I'm leaving you forever, he did leave us forever. Because from that point on, we called him Maurice.
Wow, it's amazing.
That's
So,
what I, that's what I learned.
so literally, I could start today. I mean, would you say I could start? I mean, I write, as you know, we talked about before. I write, and I find that often I never know what I'm going to write. So that's especially when I use my hands to write, you know, pen and paper. Um, so I mean, literally, I could start today and just write, is anyone there, and just start a
Oh yeah,
kind of a
yeah.
self dialogue,
Oh
and then
yeah,
just
yeah.
and how do you develop like your? I mean, because I would say like I'm kind of boring. I sort of sink into my own piece quite easily. So I kind of I miss the curiosity that I feel like you have just naturally. And you know, since we've been talking about this, your energy is so big and
But
there's so
so is
much
yours.
enthusiasm.
But so is yours. I mean, I don't know how you were sitting there and I mean, you were going, that's okay. Delete. I mean, yours, but you look, first of all, you look very spiritual. I mean, you have a lot of light in you. You have a lot of light. And to me, you have a big, you have a big aura. You're bright. To me, you're very bright. You're yellow. To me, you look like the sun. You're just bright.
Well, you see, I feel the same because, like, especially since we've been talking about the remote viewing, it's like just a whole like enormous amount of energy, you know, is really coming through. Did you have that all the time? Do you like literally meet people and say, he's that color, they're that color, or does
Oh
it
yeah.
sort of turn on and off?
Oh no, no, I can I used to be able to see colors, and then after a while, even if I don't see the color, I can tell a person if I can tell by the way how they dress, what they look like, how they eat. I could tell aura. Either you're a white aura, yellow, you're either blue or purple, red or orange or green.
Do you feel that like because I'm curious about like the I call it like a secondary autism. Like, so that moment where you're a normal person and then suddenly you're overwhelmed with information
Yes,
and
yes,
you kind of go, I don't want to talk to anybody, leave me alone. There's
yes,
just loads of information coming
yeah,
in. And I think, in fact, there's this, if you haven't seen it, the telepathy tapes
yeah,
about autistic children
yeah.
who are
Everybody's
just
talking about.
incredibly psychic. So did you have that? Did you go through this moment where you suddenly the energy started coming in and you were like, oh, you know, I need to shut this down. I
Oh,
need to
yeah.
be away from people.
Yeah, that what happens. That happened when I first opened up and started the automatic writing. That was the time whenever I just acknowledged, like, you know what, I have these abilities. Even when I was going out of body as a kid, I knew I could talk to my mother about it. I had dreams. But I couldn't talk to others. I knew to be quiet. So I think that at the time that I started the automatic writing, it was more or less like, okay, I identified myself as having these abilities. Once I identified myself and said, okay, I have them, then I started working with myself and with my guides. And it took about 9 months for me to, in anybody that opens up, it takes about 9 months. They go through an initiation period. And it was at that time that you could get the strong downloads or whatever. Now, it happens to me sometimes now, but not as much because um because I'm just busier. I mean, my life is just different. I'm doing more earthly things, like taking care of a husband, I'm taking care of animals. I'm just I don't so I think at that time when it would happen, it was that time that I was supposed to have to open up.
Right. I have a, so I'm interested, you like, we haven't touched on this, but you like, even when you were younger, you had out of body experiences. Now I have the theory, and this is like, there's not a lot of evidence to back up this theory, but my hunch is that some children have we have a traumatic experience, and that traumatic experience kind of um, opens up our energy. And then from that moment, our energy is never quite the same. Yeah. So did you have that when you were a kid or?
I don't I mean, I don't remember. I was so young, I can remember going out of the body at very young ages, at a
Oh,
very
wow.
young and keeping it until I was, like, 6 years old. I mean, I was going out of the body at 4, 5, and 6 years old, 7 years old.
Well, in your sleep, or literally you'd be just
Oh,
sitting down and
no.
just move?
No, I knew I was out of body. I knew I was out of body. I knew I was going out of body at that young age. I can remember first walking. I can remember it being in the living room and getting up off of my walking, getting up and taking my first steps. There was like this light came in me. It jolted me. And in my mind, I'm a baby and I'm thinking, ooh, this again, I don't want to be here. It meant this life. I didn't want to be in this life. I was
Okay.
on earth, and I can remember thinking, "Oh, no, not this again. I don't wanna be here." And I started to think, how can I get out of this? I'm thinking, like, how can I get out of this life? I'm like, how can I get out of here? And then I knew I couldn't get out of it, and then I had to go and I got very depressed. I felt like my stomach just dropped, like, you know how, like, you get like, the
Hmm.
pit of your stomach. So I can remember that. I do remember that. I can remember that flicker of light going, so that awareness. Now, somebody told me, a psychologist told me that many babies have that and they have it in the womb. Like they may be in the womb and thinking that they have to be born and they're thinking, I don't want to go through this again. So now I
Right.
was taught through the Fred Mansbridge that if a baby dies early, like a crib death, or that the spirit will go back and that the mother and child will make up that karma at a later date. It's the same thing if a woman has an abortion. That's a karma that is created that will be made up at a later time.
Hmm. Well, amazing. I mean, so you're literally having out of body experiences and consciousness
Knowing, oh,
at
absolutely.
like 4 years old or something like that.
Oh, yeah, and I can remember being 5 and 6 and having these dreams of, like, Russia and China, and, we're friends with in Russia and China and World War III. I mean, I can remember telling my mother, and she would listen to me, because when I met the general who helped me get into the psychic program, he asked me, he said, "How were you raised?" He said, "Were your parents strict with you?" And I said, "No." And they find that if your parents aren't strict with the child, they will have these abilities. But I told them how my mother had all of the paraphernalia. I mean, my mother used to read Edgar Cayce and listen to country western music and talk about reincarnation. I thought she was weird as a child. I was very embarrassed at 16 years old. Um, and my mother bought an encyclopedia, huge, about all about ESP. So the general said, he said it was there for you. With my mother having this, it allowed me. It somehow it freed me up to be able to explore my ability.
Well, I'm curious because one of the things I feel that it's been very uh, I'd say it's difficult. It's been difficult for me personally, like saying, okay, I'm psychic, I have these abilities, however limited they are, they are there. I cannot deny them. So uh, I feel like the most difficult thing is being ridiculed. So have you felt like you've found a way to overcome that, or have you just terrible experiences,
I
or?
was ridiculed for having the abilities. Once I got in the psychic unit, I was ridiculed. They called me a witch because I didn't go with that.
Mm.
When they closed the program down in 1995, I had to go back to work to DIA as an analyst. I was always an analyst because I had a political science degree. So I would
Right.
take all the information that they collected. I didn't, and then I had to look at it and write reports for policymakers. When I went back, I was ridiculed for being in
Okay.
this. Okay, so people knew what I did. Ah, you were the psychic. See, it doesn't work. They shut the program down. Ha ha ha. I was ridiculed. You know, I took more crap than more people, and at some point, but I, but I knew what I did, and I knew I was good, and people in the know knew. I mean, at some point, well, I really didn't care what people thought after the psychic program, like the people, like the bureaucrats, when I had to go back to the system. They were just mundane, ordinary people. I could have cared less what they thought. Now, my family, some of my family doesn't, members of my family don't want to hear about this. They're very Catholic. I'm Italian. They don't want to hear it. They don't believe in it. So you just don't talk about it. So
Mm.
yeah, you do feel like you're like a third wheel out but at this point, I just feel who's at this point, I'm 70 years old, what more can be done to me that hasn't been done? At this point, what more can,
Well,
what,
yeah, I think that's definitely a benefit
yeah,
of getting older, is you kind of go, whatever, yeah.
I'm like, I've
Um,
been through it. They tried to close down the program. You fight that. The military didn't like me. They're trying to, you fight that. And at this point, I've walked through so many fires. What does it matter what somebody, if like my neighbor, she'll tell her dad, oh, Angela's psychic. Like he doesn't know, like he'll look at me like he doesn't know what to make of it, or and I'm like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what he thinks.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's difficult to I have a joke is people will say, I don't believe in that. And I say, well, don't worry. You probably do more research on the next phone you're going to buy than whether you have the ability to travel in your mind to different places and help people. Because, we'd be ridiculed if we started studying about that stuff. But if studying about your next phone, or whether the Apple or Facebook is going to do something is, yeah, so it's kind of funny. I'm actually curious because you mentioned it. I'm like, which? It's an interesting concept, and it's like, how do you differ? I mean, for me, it's very obvious, but if somebody's watching, what is the difference between you and a witch, do you think?
I think nothing because probably I am. I mean, I do like the Wiccan. The
I'm going to
problem,
say, no, you're not. Okay, which, if it's related to the Wiccan religion, you're not doing anything Wiccan. And I don't see you casting any spells.
yeah.
Yeah. I see you literally like using your potential. Yeah, which is a stereotype that scares people. Yeah. And transforms them into things they don't want to be, like frogs. So, um, yeah, I can't see that. I can't see the analogy, but I can see it as a great term that would make people like put you in a scary box.
Oh yeah, people. Well, when I went back to work, I went back to defense. I was working as an analyst, and there was a group of us. We were working the Chinese problem, and there were about 10 or 12 of us. And I noticed that there were some men. I was really close to one girl. She was my age. We came from the same area in Pennsylvania. We became close because our accounts were very familiar, or so they were similar. So we relied on each other for information. And then there was a young little Chinese girl. She was an intern, and we had to kind of mentor her. So I would talk to these two ladies, and I noticed that there were some men there that never would, nobody was talking to me in this group. Um, and everybody would say goodnight to everybody, but nobody would talk to me. So I told Gail, the woman I said, Gail, I said, nobody talks to me. And she started laughing. She started laughing. She said, Angela, they're afraid of you. They think that you can read their mind, and they don't want to get close to you because they're afraid of you. I said, oh my God. I said, I could give it, I said, I could care less. I said, I could care less. But yeah, I never knew that. I never knew that.
You mentioned China because I'm being into this Tai Chi and this Tao practice and everything else. Do you know what anything about the Chinese remote viewing or
We did, well, no, because now see, my friend Ed May, the guy I work for now,
Ed?
he
Yeah,
he would go out to we hired him to go out to other countries to see what they were doing. And he did go to China. And he went to China, and they're like parapsychology conventions. You go and see what other scientists are doing, and he acts like he's just a scientist, but he's there to really, come back and write reports and tell us what these countries are doing. Well,
right.
he went to China, and I guess some big guy, some big woo-woo, um, took a liking to him and said, and after the conference was over, the Chinese guys invited Ed to a special meeting. So Ed went. And I think they were raising the fish from the dead. They were teaching how to get the fish back to life.
Wow.
But
Yeah.
see, when I went back, when they shut the program in 95, I went back to the Defense Intelligence Agency to work as an analyst. They were giving me an account. Like it was, some people would study the production of tanks, some would talk about the production of ballistic missiles. So that's the kind of stuff we were looking at. How is their military building up? I had to look at the stuff that you make the stuff from. Now, they never gave women a very good account. Like we always had the lowly accounts.
Okay. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like there's a very long tradition of psychicness in China.
Oh, there is.
Um,
Oh, there is.
um, and it's almost like the modern Chinese are kind of forgotten it. But like there's this incredibly rich tradition
Oh my gosh,
there.
yeah. In fact, I just did a podcast for a Japanese guy, and he said the Japanese are losing the youth. Just they don't understand. Um, but yeah, the Chinese. Well, the acupuncture comes from the Chinese,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they understand the meridians and the energy.
So my teacher, this is just a fascinating thing. He could feel the meridians in other people and felt the depth. And literally, he showed me one time, whereas I saw this again. I didn't see it with my eyes, but I saw it, and literally these spinning vortices on the body. Like if you experience the body in a different way, you experience spinning vortices, and those vortices are the acupuncture points. And literally, you can you can
wow.
work with them. And that's what he used to do. He didn't do he would put it straight through the clothes. He put the needle straight through the clothes. He said, oh, because if he doesn't do it like that, they change. Because his mind, yeah. So he's just like just straight through the clothes. And these needles, they were like the
Oh, I know.
long
I would have
needles.
needles all through me, here, on my lips, everywhere. I
Yeah,
had
man.
one guy, he was a Korean guy. And I loved the guy. And I took my girlfriend, Dottie. I said, Dottie, she never had acupuncture. And I said, "Come," and so anyway, um, she liked him. He really helped her. And
Mm,
and every time he would do me, he would go out to Dottie and he would say, she is the most sensitive person I've ever seen. But he didn't know I was psychic, but he couldn't get over my sense. He would say, she's so sensitive. She's too sensitive, is what he would say.
yeah.
And we would
Well,
laugh.
but the thing is, it's like what my teacher said is you don't need the needle. You only need the intention. The needle is there, if you like, as a suggestion for the mind. You only need an intention. Yeah, yeah, I've got a couple of my most amazing stories come
I'm
from
sure.
that experience. But wow, it's getting late for you. I've had the most incredible chat with you about these things. I think we could talk a lot longer.
We'll make another appointment, but thanks for doing that healing for me.